overall, as we're talking about the different ways you can approach like size guides, size lists, we see that these 4 brands are just they're trying to let us know you deserve better. Here's what that could look like.
Welcome to Style as Identity, a podcast by the Majority Group. Join us as we get to know the designers and founders who are shifting our understanding of the style status quo. We're your hosts. I'm Lola Catero.
And I'm Frankie Ikwuazom. Join us each episode as we learn from brands that are an extension of their values, identity, and aesthetic, and are super open about sharing the less talked about aspects of what they do. We're so glad you're here.
Size and fit, they coexist.
And they are different. So we want to talk about how. We sat down with 4 brands who walk through their different approaches to size and fit. Sene, Naito, 2 + 1 = 2, and why the brand.
If you haven't listened to the last 4 episodes, catch up or be ready for some spoilers. Okay, Frankie, let's reflect.
Lola.
Frankie.
Well, we have a lot to talk about today. I always say that and then we just zip right through it.
Because we've been thinking about it for hours.
Yeah, marinating.
Marinating.
Okay, size and fit. So I think we got to acknowledge the consumer struggle, which is that we've kind of gotten used to the fact that our clothes don't really fit most of the time. And that sizing has become this like weird formula you have to like work your way back into. And
meme-worthy.
Yes, meme-worthy. We just want to kick off with that and also acknowledge that on the flip side, from a brand perspective, it's a hard shift to make. But the reason we are so enamored by these 4 brands is that they have made that shift all in different ways, and it's paying off, which is the whole reason why we wanted to get into this theme.
I like how Mark Zhang from Sene defines the difference between size and fit from a brand perspective, right? He's like, body measurement, that's like science, that's the sizing. And there's fit, which is a little bit more difficult because it has a little bit art, a little bit of consumer preference. For me, it taps into the history of sizing, which I went deep into, and I wasn't...
How deep?
Scrolled, multiple scrolls.
Yeah.
I had no idea that we started, like sizing is a rubric, right? And it started, we used to get our clothes custom tailored, but then because of wars, when we need to outfit the men for their uniforms and have that be a standard production thing to expedite that process, was when we started to aggregate data about the male frames so we can make them their war uniforms. And that's why we went from custom fits to off the rack and using size as measurements, which is like wild. I wasn't aware of the history of sizing. And then also as it made its way into women's wear, that we also went through shifts. I mean, we're a tricky body, y'all. We have hips, we have waist, we have bust, we have chest. I mean, how does one go about to create a sizing rubric? Also one that goes through evolutions. Like in the 70s and 80s, we went through a shift called vanity sizing, where brands were like, oh, people aren't buying this at a size 10. Let's call it a size 8 so they feel smaller and sell more clothes, which we don't have time to unpack that today. But sizing has a nuanced, rich history that I've recently just learned about. But the benefits of sizing, right? It's a rubric, it's a shorthand, it helps us shop if we know our sizing. But the difference between size and fit is that size is the rubric and fit is if it affirms us. Do we put it on? Does it fit? Does it affirm us? When someone puts on, oh, I'm a size 8, and they put it on, they'll say, oh, this is my size, it fits. And that is the crucial part and why we wanted to focus on that and meet the brands that approach that fit part.
Yeah. That's really interesting. A little history lesson. Thanks, Professor. A lot of mainstream brands don't have, like, the rubric exists for size, but then because the fit is so to the individual, I don't know if that makes it into what they think about when they're thinking about scaling, production. And so what we can really kind of focus on in terms of all these brands that we talk to is the way in which thinking about fit pays off, both from a like brand perspective, where we've noticed like a lot of them have a higher LTV, lifetime value for each customer when they focus on fit or when they have a good fit. On the flip side, I know I'm more likely to keep something for longer if it fits me pretty well. And when we think through like, okay, since affirmation is so to the individual. Like, how do brands like code that? Like, how do you code that fit? And I think that's really comes out of like function.
Absolutely. Like, how well does it serve or support the person? I mean, Sene, right, fits our short kings out there. They can function and traverse through the world. Naito, the shoes, depending on which size you select for the sandal, it supports the being for standing. It's strength and physical fit. 2 + 1 = 2. By providing them measurements, the person can operate the way they want to. They can move the way they want to. If without the function, I think that's the element to nail for a brand to affirm the person without even knowing them or what they want to do every day.
Yeah. And it's paying off, right? Because when you have a specific function, you then fit so seamlessly into someone's lifestyle that it's not even like a second thought. And so we saw with all the brands we talked to how focusing on this up front has lengthened their relationships with their customers and extended the lifetime value / LTV of that customer. And so it's not only like, oh, this person keeps coming back, but it's like when you have function, you become a go-to, right? And so we saw how that actually ends up materializing, like with 2 + 1 = 2 specifically. Like loyalty quite literally was you get some cookies, candles, and like they are friends with their customers.
Name a brand that's getting honey.
Honey. That's what it was. Honey. And with Why the Brand, Marzad literally told us how, they're 3 years old as a company, and they already have an LTV that averages around 5 to 8 orders, which is like pretty impressive when you think about the fact that they're selling for a specific persona. And so, yeah, we're seeing that the function of fit also does pay off in how long you're able to engage a customer.
Customers are affirmed when the function is there. Mm-hmm. And then the brands, the LTV shows up, maybe even AOV is high, average order value. But I would say there's friction to all of this. To convert a customer, for Sene to get a customer, they have to take a smart fit quiz. Mm-hmm. For 2 + 1 = 2, the person has to measure themselves or know their measurements. For Naito, someone has to ask themselves, do they want relaxed or active fit, and what that means to them. For Why the Brand, they are a new early brand, so the customer might not be aware of like what that means to them, and they have to probably switch from the brand that they were using. And so that friction is there. I could see that their acquisition cost, the brand's customer acquisition cost, could be a lot higher. And I think that that's like, CAC costs are rising across all brands, even without friction. And so it's particularly hard for new brands to have higher acquisition costs because they also have a lot of upstart costs, but we're also seeing the LTV is higher. People are coming back for more. So it's really a long game here.
Yeah. And the friction you described comes out of this like relearning that has to happen because the customer way in, it looks so different from other companies. And then also in your mind, you're like, oh, I got to take a quiz, or, oh, now I have to think about what kind of fit I want. But the friction is created out of things that we're used to, and this just feeling quite new.
I also think subscription businesses, what a bear, not suggesting anybody goes into that, especially for apparel. But I do think that the comp set is probably quite comparable, because to get someone to opt into a recurring cost on their wallet, like for, I don't know, if someone's taking like a probiotic pill monthly or whatever, or like whatever it is, you're getting like a subscription box of clothes every month. Those CAC numbers are a lot higher to acquire that customer. And I do think that these brands that are paying more to convert a customer, but then they know that they'll get that person reoccurring, that if you're a brand trying to start something new, give customer a new thing, to not feel like sad when things are really hard to get them in the beginning, because it is a little bit more akin to that subscription business. You're paying higher from the upfront, but once you got them, they're with you.
Mm-hmm. The trust is there.
The trust is there. Okay. I did want to bring up, talking with Marzad at Why the Brand was fascinating for so many reasons. One was when he was talking about men are less comfortable talking about body issues, and went to all these reasons why. One that came up for me that he didn't mention is that women's bodies go through multiple iterations throughout a lifetime, puberty, possible pregnancies, menopause, and it makes it near impossible to kind of traverse through the world without it coming up with our friends, families, doctor, our wardrobe, especially for a lot of these things that have not been communicated widely or mainstream, or they haven't been served. And so we have to turn to our community, our friends, our network to, how did you wear this? What did you do here? And I think that is like a forcing function for women to talk about our body iterations with others, whereas the male figure isn't inherently confronted with these iterations, and it makes it even less likely that they will feel comfortable talking about them.
Yeah, that's a good observation. You got me thinking. So what's interesting about that too is that the body conversation around some of these things that women experience, like, still feels pretty much like it's happening behind closed doors. But I think because I remember talking to friends who, even you too, talking to friends who were pregnant and being like, there are so many things you don't find out until you're pregnant. Like, why is that? And, the certain stages we go through are also quite visible. We all can think of that one movie where someone gets their period and everyone knows it. But so I think they're almost like commercialized to a certain extent, where you have underwear that you can wear without, when you're on your period, or, the commercialized to a certain.
Then you find out 5 years later that underwear actually creates cancer.
Yikes. Moment of silence. But yeah, I think they're commercialized to a certain extent. So it's almost like they're commercialized to the extent of comfort, where it's like, we could talk about it like this. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, what that does is that gets us considered in situations where people are thinking through, how do we extend size? Who should we do it for? Another thing too is that it takes us back to season 1. We talked about this with Lilith, is another hypothesis on top of the existing stigma around men not talking about their body issues is brands not wanting to be the first to get into serving men in this way with, specifically with extended sizing. And it takes us back to the stat that women do hold a pretty significant part of purchasing power. And it's also possible that, something else that we didn't talk about is it's possible that some of these companies are it feels less risk averse to start with women. And then we got to the point where, we just hadn't done extended sizing for men for so long that it was okay, who's going to jump in first?
And the realities of what Marzad talked about of a brand that is bread and butter of female figure size 2 isn't going to get into, extended sizing for men, I think was based in reality. As negative as that is, it's true, which makes it all that more important that we are showcasing brands like Wide the Brand. I mean, I don't know if there's PR people listening, but these are the brands that we need to be surfacing and showing that there's a different way. Not only because make a penny off of it, but then also this is an answer that a lot of people are asking the questions to. We just talked about why men aren't typically talking about it, but doesn't mean those questions don't exist.
100%. Another cool thing about these brands is, we've been talking about size and fit as, Mark did talk about art and science, but we have been talking about them quite functionally, quite in a way where it's you can really figure this out, almost like a scientific, mathematical way. But something that all these brands had in common is their value set and how they were, although size and fit was and the way in which they were approaching it were such a distinct and unique way in which they conduct business, that was only the tip of the iceberg. Because we talked to them, and as you listen, you'll notice the majority of our conversations didn't just cover size and fit, because they're thinking so big and they're thinking about all the ways in which they want to influence the consumer, beyond just how they feel in the clothes.
And the way that manifested for Marzad at Wide the Brand, I loved how he's I have my personal mission to offer great clothes for confident men that lead into self-acceptance and confidence. But the business is a fashion company. Mm-hmm. And this is a business savvy person. He spent a decade in fashion as a designer, but he gets the business and how to make this grow and scale. But he and the other brands, they are growing something that the impact extends beyond the reaches of the brand.
Yeah. And I mean, thinking through too, they all kind of talked about personal development. They talked about in terms of just how did I grow as someone who has built this brand or co-built it? 3 out of for brands were co-founder or multiple founder models. But Stella and Felicia talk about how they have so much trust, mutual respect for each other, and how they collaborate together, and what it's looked like to have different styles and build one that's kind of a combination of both of them. Mark talked about his co-founder, how they're cousins, and there's this feeling of just being able to share that trust with each other. So I feel like they have that with their, in terms of the co-founder model, but also I feel like they also talk about what they do for the customer. Like Stella and Felicia want to help this conscious adventurer, right? Like someone who is growing and seeing the world and has a perspective. So it was really interesting to hear them talk about, here's the relationship I built with my co-founders and my team, but then also here's how I expect our consumers growing and moving away around in the world. And that's also a shared value that we have with them.
Yeah. Okay. So glad you brought up this co-founder model. As you all know, Frankie and I come from a tech background and used to live in SF. And the amount of conversations just in the tech industry about pattern matching, of how to find a great co-founder and what that looks like. And it's basically finding someone with complementary skill sets, but also looks like you, acts like you can relate on multiple fronts. And never once in those conversations did I ever hear the conversation of do you respect each other beyond their skill set and their resume? Do you have a core value set that anchors you in tough times to go back to? And when, Mark was like, we respect, me and my co-founder respect each other because we have our religion and that value set. And I'm like, that it should be rooted in that first and foremost. And then sure, complementary skill set, all those things are also table stakes, but to get through those tough times, I think it's not part of the conversation that I'm hearing, whether it's the tech industry or otherwise. And it's just so glaringly apparent what's missing. I mean, just hearing, Felicia and Stella talk and kind of finish each other's sentences and pick off and lead, they are together. Mm-hmm. That respect is palpable.
Yeah, that's real. What are some of the things, or what's something that's really stood out to you as you're just, relishing in the 4 conversations?
I would love to have a precious moment.
Okay, Lola, have that moment.
Forecasts are great, but you cannot forecast personal development. Who said it?
Who said it?
Marzad said that. And
the reason I liked that too is because we always asked, what was your journey to where you are now? And I think that oftentimes what you think about is the more technical stuff, like the things you can plan for. And it takes deeper reflection to think through, how am I different from the person I was 4, 5, 12 years ago when this brand started? How's my co-founder different? How's my customer different? And so I really like that from just starting a brand perspective for anyone who's looking into that. But I also just liked it just, as humans. I'll never forget when I started my career, people were like, what's your 5-year plan? And I immediately was like, my car's outside. I don't have a car, but you know what I mean? I think it's just an extra reminder in terms of trusting the process in just a bit of a different way. You can really say I'm going to do this in 2 years, and then by 3 years, I'm going to do this. But that doesn't always cover the ways in which you're going to change and become more of an advocate for yourself, or just feel like you're taking up the space that you've always meant to.
100%. Because I know when I think of a place I'd like to be in someday, I could feel blocked by oh, but I can't do that today. It's well, no shit. That's why it's a future state. And so if I have that, then I would say, where do I need to start? Right. It kind of, his quote for me serve as why we shouldn't feel blocked by that future state, because we don't know where to start today. Is well, the point is that we're going to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to get there.
Yeah.
Love it. I know you didn't ask me, but a favorite moment of mine, but I know you were thinking it, is how, talking to Seiji-san from Naito, talking through how, his journey really went from beauty, wanting to create something that was so starkly different from what he was seeing in the world, which some would say is less scientific, than going back to all the way to function, which we talked about a lot earlier in this episode. But I thought that was really interesting to see a way in which, a lot of people start from a problem of like, this is broken, this isn't working. And then they create something to fix it. And maybe they find beauty along the way. And that beauty comes from like imprinting some of who they are, maybe their personal mission, like we were talking about earlier, or just finding their creative style. And I think it was cool that Naito kind of flipped it in that, like, he just wanted to create a more beautiful shoe. But then out of that, realize, like, based on these materials and based on my own personal preferences and how and based on like historically what I'm realizing is actually really good for humans and their posture, like, I'm going to actually create this input because I'm committed to doing something beautiful really well. But it's just interesting to see how that's flipped, like came from a beauty, like more of a like inner eye desire, and then created something that was ultimately very scientific in the way it delivered for the consumer.
That's very astute.
I'm just riffing.
I mean, I did not pick up on that, but 100%. I also was thinking about, how it's like this physical shift that the shoe helps us do. And I'm like, this is the wellness I want to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And also something about Naito too is like, I was kind of like, burn it all down, like get rid of the size guide. Let's get back to tailors and like customized clothing. And I like that Naito was like, let's just evolve the size guide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's just give you more ownership over like what you're looking for, and you can go with that. But like, let's like extend what a size guide can do. So I think it just shows like the different ways you can approach size and fit. It's like, you can go sizeless. You can also just expand like all the different definitions that someone can use to find out what it is they're actually looking for.
The only size guide to have the length of a foot and personal preference. Personal preference. Come on.
We've talked about this too, Lola, but overall, as we're talking about the different ways you can approach like size guide, size lists, we see that these 4 brands are just they're trying to let us know you deserve better. Here's what that could look like. And it was cool to see the literal 4 different ways in which they all approached it. Like no one approached it the same exact way. And so, when we're thinking about sizing and when, for ourselves, maybe as someone with a brand, you can think through like, all right, are we adding more sizes so that more people can look good in this? Are we thinking through what those functional differences are so that more people can feel good in this? Are we making it so that it's made for just you? Are we making it so that it's made to fit your lifestyle? Like those are all different aspects of fit. And it really makes me realize that like you can't have fit without fashion. Like quite literally, like that is such an intrinsic part of what fit is.
Yeah. And you can't have fashion without fit.
Truly.
Thank you, Naito, Sene, 2 + 1 = 2, and Wide the Brand for coming on the show, having some chats, and giving us something to marinate on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Damn, I love these brands.
Same. I mean, I love that they're just into getting on a podcast and having a very real conversation about what's enabled their brand to survive.
I love it. Okay, let's keep learning together. And all you out there, if it's in your journey to make a purchase today, check out some of the brands we've been talking to.
And if it's in your journey to show us some love, hit that subscribe button.
See you next time.
Bye.